The city never fully slept, but at 2 o'clock in the morning in February, with a blizzard pressing down on every street and corner, it came as close as it ever did. Marcus Rivers had learned to love these hours. The silence, the predictability, the way the world asked nothing of him except to drive home without incident. He'd been working the night shift for the city's Department of Electrical Infrastructure for almost 8 years now. And somewhere along the way, these empty streets had become the only place where his mind felt quiet enough to rest. He was 40 minutes from his apartment when he saw the hazard lights. A black sedan parked half on the curb. The kind of car that cost more than he made in 2 years. The kind of car that belonged in downtown parking garages, not on the shoulder of Crestwood Avenue at 2 in the morning. The engine was dead. The hazard lights blinked in slow, weakening pulses, like something running out of time, like something that had been waiting as long as it could. Marcus could have kept driving. Should have, maybe. It was late. He was tired. There was a 7-year-old girl at home who needed him to show up for school pickup in 6 hours. He could have convinced himself that some other driver would stop, that the city's emergency services would find the car eventually. He pulled over without thinking about it. That was the kind of man Marcus Rivers was. Not reckless, not particularly heroic, just incapable of driving past something that was clearly wrong. His ex-wife used to call it his fatal flaw, the way he couldn't turn away from other people's problems when he could barely handle his own. She'd left him 3 years ago because of it, or at least partly because of it. There were lots of reasons when you added them all up. But the inability to walk away from something broken was definitely one of them. He grabbed his work jacket from the passenger seat and stepped out into the cold. The wind hit him immediately. It cut through the fabric like it was nothing. February in the city wasn't just cold. It was a kind of cold that made you understand why your ancestors had figured out fire. He pulled his collar up and started walking toward the car. She was standing beside the sedan in a wool coat that clearly hadn't been designed for this temperature. No hat, no gloves. She had been out here long enough for the cold to settle into her posture, sinking into her shoulders. But her face was something different entirely. Her face was composed in a way that made him feel like he was the one intruding. Marcus could see it immediately, that carefully maintained expression, the kind that came from years of practice. Not peaceful, not calm. That look that came from someone who had learned, a long time ago, that showing fear was the same as showing weakness. And weakness was the same as losing everything. She was tall, probably in her early 40s, with dark hair pulled back tight enough that it had to pull. Her eyes were intelligent and tired. She was the kind of beautiful that you didn't notice immediately because you were too busy noticing the power. But once you saw the power, you couldn't help but notice the beauty underneath it. He reached for his phone to call for help. She crossed the distance between them in 3 steps. Not hurried, deliberate. She placed her hand on his arm. The touch was precise. The touch of someone who had learned how to make people listen without asking nicely, without pleading, without any of the tools that normal people used. "Don't call anyone," she said. Her voice was low and precise, matching the rest of her. Not frightened, not panicking. The quiet instruction of someone who had already made the decision about what was going to happen, and was simply waiting for him to catch up. "And don't tell anyone you saw me." Marcus looked at her. He looked at the expensive coat, the luxury car with dead hazard lights, the way her hands were shaking slightly even though her face wasn't showing it. He looked at her eyes, and in that split second he saw it. Terror. Raw, completely unguarded terror, the kind that takes a second to slip through before the control comes back online. Then she turned away, and the moment was gone. "I'm not in danger," she said, still looking out toward the darkness of the street. "I'm not hurt. I'm not in any kind of legal trouble. I just need to not be here, not on any camera, not on any record, just not here." Marcus understood then that whatever had brought her to the side of a road in a blizzard was significant enough that she'd abandoned a car that probably cost more than everything he owned. Significant enough that she couldn't risk calling for help through normal channels. Significant enough that asking a stranger to help her was less risky than asking anyone she actually knew. "Okay," he said. He took his hand off his phone. "Okay, you want me to drive you somewhere?" "Just somewhere safe," she said. "Somewhere nobody would look." He gestured toward his truck. "I've got coffee from earlier. It's cold, but it exists. We can get somewhere warmer." She walked with him to his truck without speaking. He noticed the way she moved, careful, calculating, already thinking 3 steps ahead about what came next. She got into the passenger seat and pulled the door shut. Marcus turned the key. The engine caught. He pulled back onto the street and headed east, away from the highway, away from the main roads where traffic cameras would pick up his vehicle. He didn't know yet that this single decision would change both of their lives. He just drove, watching her in his peripheral vision, watching her hold herself together through sheer familiarity with the technique. By the time they'd been driving for 10 minutes, it was clear that they weren't going to speak much. She stared out the window. He kept his hands on the wheel and his mind on the road. Whatever this was, it was big enough that she was willing to ask a stranger for help. That meant it was bigger than either of them. The hazard lights on her abandoned car would blink themselves out slowly over the next 6 hours, fading from orange to nothing, dying out completely around the time the sun came up. Neither of them knew it yet, but that car would become evidence. In about 6 hours, a police officer would drive past it, call it in, and trigger a search that would eventually lead to a woman missing from a hotel room across town. A woman who was supposed to be in a board meeting on Friday morning. A woman whose absence would make headlines before the day was out. But for now, there was just the two of them, driving through empty streets, heading toward a 24-hour diner that existed in fluorescent light on the edge of the city where nobody paid attention to faces, and Marcus was about to learn exactly why she needed to disappear. The diner looked like every diner at 2:30 in the morning looked. A little too bright, a little too hollow. Staffed by people who had learned not to ask questions about the customers who came in at odd hours. They sat in a corner booth under fluorescent lights that made everything look slightly worse than it actually was. Marcus ordered coffee. She ordered coffee but didn't drink it. She sat with both hands wrapped around the cup, just holding it, letting it warm her hands. She hadn't spoken in the entire drive. She hadn't checked her phone or asked where they were going. She just sat quietly in his truck, looking out at the dark streets, thinking about something that made her jaw tight. "You're not going to ask," she said finally. It wasn't a question, it was a statement, delivered like she was testing him. "I figured you'd tell me what you wanted me to know," Marcus said. He sipped his coffee. It was bitter and hot and exactly what he needed at 2:30 in the morning when he should have been sleeping. "And I figured if you didn't want to tell me, it wasn't my business." She studied him for a moment. The work jacket he was still wearing, the city ID clipped to his chest. Marcus Rivers, Department of Electrical Infrastructure. The particular steadiness of someone who had learned not to show when things surprised him. "That's not how most people work," she said. "Maybe not. But you're not most people, and I'm not most people, so we might as well start from that assumption." She actually smiled at that, just barely, like she'd forgotten how. And his words reminded her that it was still a physical possibility. "I need to be somewhere that isn't on any camera or record for the next few hours," she said. "I'm not in danger, I'm not hurt. I just need time that nobody is tracking." "Your phone's been going off since you got in my truck," Marcus observed. It had buzzed 6 times in the past 30 minutes, each time making her shoulders tense. "I know. Someone's going to report you missing." "Someone already has," she said. "That's not the problem I'm trying to solve tonight." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. She had the composure of someone who had sat in rooms full of people waiting for her to crack, and had simply outlasted all of them. The kind of composure that came from power. But her hands were still cold. He could see it in the way she held the cup, the slight tremor she was trying to hide. And beneath the control was something that looked to him less like calm, and more like a person holding themselves together through sheer familiarity with the technique. The kind of person who had learned, a long time ago, that falling apart was a luxury she couldn't afford. He picked up his phone, not to call anyone, just to set it on the table face up so she could see he wasn't recording anything. The news alert was still on the screen from the drive over. She glanced at it, then back at him. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Since just before we got here," he said. "The alert came through while we were driving." The color had drained from her face. She set down the coffee cup with careful precision, like if she lost control of even that small movement, the entire rest of her would collapse. "And you're still here?" she asked. "You haven't given me a reason to leave yet," he said. "And something tells me that if I did leave right now, it wouldn't change whatever's about to happen. You'd just handle it alone. And maybe—" He paused. "Maybe you shouldn't handle it alone." She was quiet for a long moment. In the fluorescent light of the diner, he could see the exhaustion beneath the control. See the moment she decided something. To trust him or to test him. He wasn't sure which. Then she said, "If I sign a contract Friday morning, 200 families lose their homes. Not because the project fails, because it succeeds exactly the way the people behind it planned." Marcus didn't answer immediately. He turned his coffee cup once in his hands. Once. Twice. A nervous habit he wasn't even aware of. But she noticed. That was the problem. That was the beginning of the real problem. With her, the capacity to see things. to notice when people were pretending to be calm. He had grown up 11 blocks from the Crestwood corridor. He had watched that neighborhood get revitalized when he was 19, watched the laundromats and the corner churches and the families he had known his entire life disappear inside 2 years, replaced by condominiums that started at a price point designed to exclude everyone who had been there before. The city called it development. The people it happened to called it displacement. "Tell me everything," he said. By the time the sun came up, Marcus had called his supervisor and said he was taking a personal day. He'd never taken a personal day. In 8 years with the city, he had used maybe 3 days of sick leave, all of them because of Amara. Tom Barnes, his supervisor, had seemed surprised but unsurprised. Tom was good at that, the ability to recognize when something significant was happening without requiring explanation. They'd moved from the diner to a borrowed apartment around 4 in the morning. It belonged to a friend of Victoria's, one of the few people in her life she could actually trust. The furniture was sparse and impersonal, the kind of place designed not to feel like anyone's home. Victoria had finally eaten something. Toast, some fruit. She'd showered, she'd changed into clothes from her emergency bag. Apparently she was the kind of person who kept an emergency bag, and she looked less like a woman running for her life, and more like a woman who was about to make a decision that would change everything. Marcus sat across from her in the borrowed kitchen. Coffee number 4 or 5, he'd lost count. The sun was coming up over the city. In a few hours, Amara would wake up. His neighbor, Mrs. Jackson, would give her breakfast and get her ready for school. She did that sometimes when Marcus had emergency shifts. But he hated that. Hated having to rely on other people for his daughter. Hated the feeling that he was always one crisis away from failing her. "Start at the beginning," he said. "Who are you? Who's trying to hurt you? What exactly are we dealing with?" Victoria was quiet for a long moment. She seemed to be deciding how much to tell him, whether trust once offered could hold. "My name is Victoria Ashford," she said finally. "I run a company called Ashford Capital, real estate development. My father built it over 30 years from a single office in Baltimore to one of the biggest commercial development groups in the mid-Atlantic. He died 22 months ago. Heart attack. Swift and unglamorous, the way he would have preferred." Marcus waited. "He left me the company with one condition," she continued. "I had to retain controlling interest for a minimum of 5 years before any sale or merger could be finalized without unanimous board approval. He knew my cousin David would try to push me into something. He didn't anticipate how efficiently David would work." She pulled out her phone and showed him a merger proposal. 47 pages. She scrolled to a section highlighted in yellow. "This is a rezoning play," she said. "On paper, it's growth. It looks like expansion into new markets, more properties, bigger revenue. But what David actually designed is this: 3 residential neighborhoods in the low-income corridor. They would be reclassified as mixed commercial zones within 18 months of closing. The residents who have lived there for decades would lose legal protection once the classification changed. Their property values would plummet. They would be forced to sell. And then Stratton Group builds luxury condominiums starting at $800,000 each." Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. He knew exactly which neighborhoods she was talking about. He'd grown up 2 blocks away. He'd watched it happen once already. The gentrification wave that hit the city in the late 90s, watched families disappear, watched the corner store his mother used to take him to get turned into a juice bar that nobody on that block could afford to use. "Your father refused this," Marcus said. "It wasn't a question." "He did," Victoria said. "I found his note about 8 months before he died, handwritten, in a folder I wasn't technically supposed to have access to. 'This is not what we built this for.' That's all he wrote. But it was enough. It was more than enough." "And you?" Marcus asked. "I was going to sign it," Victoria said quietly. "Right up until I drove into that blizzard last night, I was planning to walk into the boardroom Friday morning and sign my name on the dotted line. I was going to do exactly what my father refused to do." She set down the phone. Her hands were shaking now, but not from cold. "I'm tired," she said. "My father has been dead for 22 months, and I'm still trying to figure out how to run the company he built. David has been in my ear for 2 years, telling me that I'm weak, that I can't hold the board, that this deal is inevitable. He's been telling me that strong women make hard choices, and I started believing him. I started believing that saying yes was strength, and saying no was weakness." Marcus reached across the table. He didn't touch her hand, just made it an option. She took it. "Why me?" he asked. "Why a stranger? Why not go to the police or a lawyer or—" "Because they won't believe me," Victoria said. "They'll think I'm sabotaging my own company. They'll say I'm having an emotional crisis because my father died. They'll find a way to make it about my weakness instead of about what's actually happening. But if an independent city official, someone with nothing to gain, says the infrastructure in those neighborhoods is compromised, That the rezoning won't work economically? That's harder to dismiss. You want me to testify, Marcus said, about infrastructure problems in the Crestwood corridor. There are problems, Victoria said, real ones. A 2014 report flagged structural issues, recommended remediation. The remediation was never completed. If you're willing to present that information to the board, it would make David's rezoning plan economically unfeasible. The cost of retrofitting the grid would destroy the profit margins entirely. Marcus understood then. He understood the whole thing, all of it, the way it fit together, the danger, the opportunity, the cost. If I do that, he said slowly, David Ashford is going to know it was you who brought me in. And he's going to spend whatever time it takes making sure my reputation is destroyed. I won't work in infrastructure in this city again. I know, Victoria said. That's why I can't ask you. I can only tell you what's possible. You get to choose. Marcus sat back in his chair. Outside, the city was waking up. Cars passed the window. People on their way to jobs they probably didn't love. Making choices they'd probably made long ago to stop questioning. And here he was, being offered a choice that actually mattered. If I choose to do this, he said, it's not because you asked. It's because I grew up in that neighborhood, because I remember those families, because I watched it happen once already, and I swore I wouldn't watch it happen again if I had a say in it. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. But she didn't let them fall. She just held his hand and let the tears accumulate without falling. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet, Marcus said. We haven't won anything. But even as he said it, he knew they had won something. They'd won the moment where two people from completely different worlds chose to trust each other. They'd won the moment where doing the right thing felt possible, even if it cost everything. The borrowed apartment was small and sterile, the kind of place designed not to feel like anyone's home. Victoria sat on the couch at 3 a.m. Thursday, and she told him everything. Not because he demanded it, but because she needed to break, and he was the only person who'd offered her the space to do so. My father built Ashford Capital from nothing, she said. 1 office, 1 phone, 30 years of work. He was obsessive about it, about building something that lasted, something that meant something. Marcus listened. He didn't interrupt. He'd learned in the 8 years since his ex-wife left that listening was a skill most people didn't have. The ability to sit with someone else's story without inserting yourself into it. When he died, he left me the company with a condition. I had to keep controlling interest for 5 years before any merger could happen. He knew David would try. He didn't know. She paused. He didn't anticipate how efficiently David would work. She pulled out her phone again, showed him emails, showed him David's strategy, how David had positioned himself, cultivated board members, built the case methodically over 2 years. The merger with Stratton Group is David's creation, she said. The rezoning play was his idea. He's been building the narrative for it since my father died. And I was too tired, too grief-stricken, too overwhelmed to stop it. I was going to sign that contract Friday morning and undo everything my father built, and I knew it was wrong. Why didn't you refuse? Marcus asked gently. Because refusing means fighting David directly, fighting the board, fighting the narrative that I'm too emotional, too weak, too much of a woman to hold the company. Because if I refuse, he'll spend years making it clear that I made the wrong decision. And because... She stopped. Because I'm terrified. All the time. And sometimes the easiest choice is to let the people who aren't terrified make the decisions. Marcus understood then, not just her situation, but who she was, a powerful woman who'd learned to hide the fact that she was fundamentally alone, that the power was a cage as much as it was a tool. He took her hand across the table. You don't have to sign it, he said. You have another option. If I do this, Victoria said, if we do this, I lose the company anyway. David will make sure of it. Either the board votes to terminate the merger, and I've made an enemy of him, or something else happens, something worse. Either way, I'm not walking away from Friday with what I came in with. I know, Marcus said, but you're still here, she said. Even though you know what it costs you, you're still here. Yeah, Marcus said, I am. By Thursday morning, they'd been awake for nearly 40 hours. Victoria had moved between her hotel and the borrowed apartment, staying as off the grid as possible. The board meeting had been moved up from Friday to Thursday at 9 a.m. David had made the change, trying to catch them unprepared. But Victoria had anticipated it. Victoria was, after all, smarter than David. She was just tired enough that she'd stopped trusting her own intelligence. Marcus sat across from her in the hotel lobby. She was back in her business suit, back in CEO mode. But something had shifted. The armor was still there, but it was visible now. He could see where it was cracking. The infrastructure report is real, she said quietly. 2014. Structural problems, remediation flagged and never completed. If you present this information to the board, it becomes a material question about the project's economic viability. And if I present it, Marcus said, David knows it came from you. Yes. And he destroys me. Yes, Victoria said, I won't lie to you. I won't tell you it's going to be okay. He's connected. He has money. He has access to people who can make lives complicated for people like you. Marcus nodded. He'd always known that. He'd grown up understanding that there were people in the world with power and people without it. He'd spent his whole adult life trying not to want the power, trying to be someone who just worked his job, came home to his daughter, and didn't ask for things he couldn't have. Why? He asked. Why does David want this so badly? Money, Victoria said. Leverage in the company. Control, but also pride. He wants to prove that he's stronger than me, that he was right to push the merger, that women in power are weak and emotional, and should defer to men like him. And you want to prove him wrong. I want my father's legacy to mean something, Victoria said. I want those families to stay in their homes. I want David to understand that integrity isn't weakness. Marcus reached for her hand. She let him. If I do this, he said, there's no going back. Your life changes, my life changes, Amara's life changes. Are you prepared for that? Victoria looked at him directly. In her eyes was fear and grief and something that looked like love, but couldn't possibly be love, because they'd known each other for less than 24 hours. I'm prepared to accept the cost to you, she said. I'm not prepared to accept the cost to myself. I've spent my whole life accepting costs that other people dictated, but this one I'm choosing. Then we do it, Marcus said. Thursday night at 10 o'clock. Marcus's apartment was quiet except for the sound of Amara's nighttime breathing from her bedroom. Victoria stood in his kitchen, looking at the space, the magnets on the refrigerator covered in Amara's drawings, the books on the shelf, the small life he'd built in 42 square feet. This is where you live, she said, not a question. This is where we live, Marcus said, Amara and me. Victoria turned to face him. She was smaller here, in his apartment, in his world. The business suit was gone. She was wearing jeans and a sweater that made her look less like a CEO and more like a woman who was beginning to understand what she was about to lose. After tomorrow, she said, everything changes. You could still walk away. You could call in sick. You could say the report is incomplete. You could let the deal go through. Is that what you want? Marcus asked. No, but I need you to know that it's an option. That you have a choice all the way up until the moment you walk into that boardroom. Marcus stepped closer. He didn't touch her. He respected the distance she was holding. My daughter asked me this morning if I was scared, he said. She asked me if the thing I was going to do was scary. Are you? Terrified, he said. I'm going to walk into a room full of people who have spent their entire lives winning, and I'm going to tell them something they don't want to hear, and they're going to try to destroy me for it. Marcus, but I'm doing it anyway, he said, because Amara watches how I behave. She watches what I choose, and if I walk away from this because I'm scared, I'm teaching her that fear is bigger than what's right. And I can't teach her that. I won't teach her that. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. This time they fell. This is too much to ask of you, she said. You're not asking, Marcus said. You already asked. I already said yes. Now I'm just following through. He took her hand and led her to his bedroom, not for anything other than to sit on the edge of his bed. A place where he'd sat with Amara countless times when she had nightmares. A place where safety felt possible. After tomorrow, he said, if the deal fails, if David leaves, if everything goes the way we're hoping, what happens then? I don't know, Victoria said. I haven't thought beyond Friday. You should, Marcus said, because I need to know if this is just about the deal, or if this is about us, about something real. She looked at him in the low light of his bedroom, the way the lamp made shadows under her eyes. She looked small and powerful and terrified all at once. What do you want the answer to be? She asked. I want it to be about us, Marcus said. I want this to be the beginning of something, not the conclusion of a crisis. I want you to show up at the end of this because you choose to, not because you're still processing a trauma. That's smart, Victoria said quietly. I know it's smart, but I don't want to be smart. I want you. She kissed him then. Not because the moment was perfect, because the moment was real, and real was the only thing either of them could afford anymore. When it ended, she rested her forehead against his. After Friday, she said, after it's over. If you still want this, if you still want me, then yes, not because I need you, because I choose you. That's all I'm asking for, Marcus said. They didn't sleep that night. They sat in his kitchen drinking coffee that neither of them actually wanted, talking about everything that had nothing to do with the next morning, about Amara's obsession with chess, about Victoria's father and what he would have thought about the neighborhoods they were fighting for, and why it mattered that they stay the way they'd always been. By the time Marcus had to leave for his shift, the decision was no longer theoretical. It was lived. They weren't two people solving a problem anymore. They were two people who'd chosen each other, and now had to live with the consequences. Saturday morning. Marcus had gotten Tom to let him take the shift earlier in the week. He woke at 6 and made pancakes. It was tradition, something he and Amara did every Saturday. She came out of her room still half asleep, one arm hanging off her side like always, her hair a disaster, her eyes sharp despite the hour. "What kind today?" he asked. "Butterfly," she said immediately. She always said butterfly. He poured the batter into the shape of wings, flipped it at exactly the right moment. It landed perfect, wings spread like it was about to take flight. "Dad," Amara said while he was working on the second one. "Yeah, baby? Is that woman, Victoria, are you going to marry her?" Marcus didn't flip the pancake for a moment, just stood there with the spatula midair. "Why would you think that?" he asked carefully. "Because you look at her the same way you look at me, like you're scared and trying to hide it." Marcus flipped the pancake. It landed butterfly-shaped. Perfect. "I don't know if I'm going to marry her," he said, "but I'm going to do something today that might change a lot of things." "Is it scary?" Amara asked. "Very scary," Marcus said. "But you're doing it anyway?" "Yeah," he said, "I'm doing it anyway." Amara climbed onto the kitchen stool and watched him cook. She was 7 years old, already smarter than half the adults he knew, already able to see through bullshit to what actually mattered. "That's what you always tell me," she said, "that I should do the scary thing." "I know." "So you're taking your own advice," Amara said. Not a question, a statement, a judgment. "I'm trying to," Marcus said. "Good," Amara said with the complete satisfaction of someone who had just closed an argument. "You should do that more. Be brave like you tell me to be brave." He put her butterfly pancake in front of her, added maple syrup, whipped cream. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" Amara asked. "For holding me accountable," Marcus said. "For reminding me what matters." She ate her pancake and didn't respond, because at 7 years old she already understood that some things didn't require words, some things just required presence. Marcus looked at his daughter who was so smart, so perceptive, so dependent on him to model what integrity looked like, and he understood exactly why he was going to walk into that boardroom. It wasn't for Victoria, it wasn't for the company. It was for the moment where Amara could look at him and believe he was the kind of man who chose what was right. Even when it was hard, that was everything. The board meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 9 in the morning at Ashford Capital's headquarters in the downtown financial district. The building was all glass and steel, the kind of building designed to announce success. The conference room was on the 42nd floor, and from the windows you could see the entire city spread out below you. All those small lives. All those people making decisions they thought were private, not knowing that everything they did had consequences that rippled across the whole landscape. Marcus had never been in a room like this before. The table was mahogany, or something like mahogany. The chairs were the kind of expensive that didn't announce their expense, but somehow made you aware of it anyway. The paintings on the walls were abstract, and meant to suggest intelligence without requiring anything of you. Victoria briefed him in the hours leading up to the meeting. She showed him names of board members. Jackson Reed, the chairman, cautious, someone who could be swayed by evidence if the evidence was presented correctly. David Ashford, of course. 3 other board members whose names Marcus tried to memorize, and probably would forget under stress. "They'll question your motives," Victoria said. "They'll suggest you've been coached by me. They'll try to make it about personality instead of facts." "I know," Marcus said. "David will attack. He'll question your competence, your motives, your right to be in the room at all." "I know," Marcus said. "You can still back out." "I'm not backing out," Marcus said. She'd moved to kiss him then, quick and desperate, like she needed to remember something true before everything got complicated. The night before the meeting, Tom Barnes had called him. Tom never called him outside of work. "You're doing the right thing," Tom said. "Whatever this is, Marcus, you're doing the right thing." "How do you know that?" Marcus asked. "Because I know you, and the only reason you'd miss work is if something mattered, and the only thing that matters to you is Amara, and doing right by people." Marcus felt something settle in his chest. Tom had been with the city for 26 years. Tom had seen systems fail, had watched how money and power could bend things that were supposed to be straight. Tom knew. "I might lose my job," Marcus said. "Yeah," Tom said. "You might, but you'll still be able to look yourself in the mirror, and that matters more than a job." When Marcus hung up the phone, he understood something clearer. This wasn't just about stopping a deal. This was about what kind of man he was going to be. The kind who stood for something, or the kind who stayed quiet. He found the infrastructure report that evening, printed it out, read it twice. The language was technical, but the meaning was simple. The grid in the Crestwood corridor had problems. Those problems were going to cost money to fix. If Stratton Group tried to develop in that area, they would discover those costs during construction. The project would become economically unfeasible. It was perfect. It was also true. The boardroom was already full when Marcus arrived at 8:55, directed there by security with an uncertain look. They didn't know who he was, and clearly he wasn't supposed to be there. He wore his best suit, the one he'd bought years ago for job interviews. His city ID was clipped to his chest. His hands were steady, or steady enough. Victoria was already seated at the head of the table, looking like someone who had never been uncertain about anything in her life. Looking like her father's daughter. Looking like the kind of woman who could run a company, and also fight the system that tried to control it. Jackson Reed was there, the chairman, a man in his 60s with grey hair and the kind of careful expression that suggested he'd learned how to survive in corporate environments, by never committing to anything too early. David Ashford was there too. Marcus recognized him from photos Victoria had shown him. Mid-50s, expensive suit, the kind of face that suggested he'd never been told no about anything important. The lawyers were there, 2 of them, representing Stratton Group. The camera crew was there too. Victoria had invited the press. Somehow word had gotten out that something was happening, and journalists were setting up equipment in the corner of the room with that special enthusiasm that came from smelling a story. "Thank you all for coming," Jackson Reed said, calling the meeting to order. "This is an unusual gathering, but Victoria has indicated there are concerns about the merger that require board attention before we can vote on proceeding." David stood up. "With respect to Victoria, I think we all know what's happening here. She's having second thoughts because her father built this company conservatively. She's trying to sabotage a deal that is clearly beneficial to Ashford Capital's future." "The deal," Victoria said calmly, "has a material flaw that has not been adequately investigated. I'm asking the board to pause and allow proper due diligence before proceeding." "What material flaw?" David asked. "There is no flaw. This is about... There's a structural issue in the infrastructure of the rezoning corridor," Victoria said. A 2014 city report flagged ongoing problems with the electrical grid, problems that were never remediated. "An independent assessment official is here to present this information." That was Marcus's cue. He stood. He walked to the front of the room. He didn't have the ease of movement that David had, the kind of ease that came from spending your entire life in rooms like this. But he had something else. He had certainty. He had truth. He had spent his entire working life understanding systems, and how they failed when people didn't maintain them properly. "My name is Marcus Rivers," he said. "I work for the city's Department of Electrical Infrastructure. I've reviewed the 2014 report and the maintenance records from 2015 through today. The structural problems identified in 2014 were never addressed. The remediation cost was estimated at approximately $12 million. That cost would make Stratton Group's development in the corridor economically unfeasible." David stood up. "This man has no legal standing in this room," David said. "His presence here is irregular, his claims are unverified, and this entire display is a transparent attempt by a CEO who is losing control of her own board to manufacture a pretext for sabotaging her family's legacy." "The report exists," Marcus said quietly. "You can verify it in the city system in approximately 4 minutes. I can give you the case number again if you need it." He said it without anger, without performance. The way he said things when he was certain, because certainty didn't require volume. David looked at him. That long, assessing look designed to make the recipient feel the distance between where they stood and where the power in the room resided. Marcus had been on the receiving end of that look from the time he was old enough to be in rooms where people like David existed, from teachers who assumed he wasn't smart, from managers who assumed he didn't belong, from the world in general, which seemed to operate under the assumption that black men in working-class jobs should stay quiet and grateful. He looked back. He did not fill the silence with anything. It was David who looked away first. The room shifted. The camera crew lowered their equipment. The journalists stopped writing about what David was saying and started writing about what the power shift meant. Jackson Reed leaned back in his chair. He looked at Marcus, then at Victoria, then at David. "I'm requesting independent verification of the infrastructure claims before we proceed," Jackson said. "If there are material questions about the project's economic viability, this board is legally required to investigate them." David's face went white. "You have no idea what you've just done," David said to Victoria. "I've introduced a material question about the integrity of the approval process," Victoria said calmly, "which is what the board is legally required to investigate before a transaction of this size closes. I'd have thought you'd want to be on the right side of that." "You'll lose the deal," David said. "Then we lose the deal," Victoria said. "That was always an option my father recognized and chose not to take." She stood up. She walked to the window. The city spread out below them. All those lives, all those people in their small apartments and their small choices. David left the room without another word. He didn't resign that day. That would come later. That would come after he understood completely that the game had changed. Jackson Reed called a recess at 9:23. As the room emptied, Victoria looked at Marcus across the crowded space. For one moment, 1 second, their eyes met. And in that moment, everything passed between them. The choice they'd made together, the cost they'd accepted, the beginning of something neither of them had anticipated when a luxury car broke down on a cold night in February. The investigation took 11 weeks. Jackson Reed led it personally, bringing in outside auditors to review David's knowledge of the infrastructure issues. They found emails, they found internal memos, they found evidence that David had known about the problems and had decided not to disclose them because the timeline would have derailed his deal. The press covered it relentlessly. Financial journalists filed stories about Ashford Capital's aborted merger. The city's infrastructure department opened a formal review of Marcus's original report. By the 4th week, 3 news outlets were running investigations into how infrastructure assessment could be buried in administrative backlogs for years without proper follow-up. By week 7, David Ashford had resigned. Not dramatically, not with a fight, just with a quiet letter that said he was stepping back for personal reasons and wished the company well. Men like David understood when the game had changed. They knew how to disappear before things got too public, too damaging. The board voted to terminate the merger by mutual agreement with Stratton Group. The press release used the phrase "changing strategic priorities" and said nothing else. But everyone understood what had actually happened. A deal built on corruption had been stopped, a neighborhood had been saved, and a woman had chosen integrity over power. Victoria remained CEO. She remained in control. But the control felt different now, less like imprisonment and more like responsibility. Marcus went back to work on Monday morning. Tom Barnes looked at him for a long moment when he arrived. "Heard you had an eventful week," Tom said. "Little bit," Marcus said. Tom nodded slowly. He didn't ask for details. Tom had learned over 26 years that some things didn't require explanation. "That infrastructure report," Tom said, "the one you cited, 4471-C, got flagged for formal review this morning. They're going to want your documentation." "I've got everything," Marcus said. Tom handed him a work order. "Transformer relay in the Millbrook corridor. Might as well get started." Marcus took the work order. Then he stopped. "Tom," he said, "that engineering track, the advanced program, does the city still run it?" Tom looked at him over his reading glasses. "Spring enrollment opens in March," Tom said. "I know. I wanted to know if you'd write me a recommendation." Tom was quiet for a moment, a long moment, the kind that stretched. "I've been waiting for you to ask me that for 4 years," Tom said. "Yes, I will write you a recommendation." 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks of Victoria untangling herself from the company she'd inherited, the legacy she'd questioned, the person she'd been forced to become. 3 weeks of conversations with Jackson Reed about the board's future. 3 weeks of understanding that winning a business victory didn't fix the personal emptiness. That had defined her life for 41 years. She didn't call Marcus. She wanted to. God, she wanted to. She found herself in therapy on a Tuesday afternoon, in an office that cost $400 an hour, sitting across from a woman who'd been recommended by someone Victoria barely remembered. "I don't know how to not destroy it," Victoria said, which was the most honest thing she'd said in months. "Destroy what?" the therapist asked. "I'm in love with him, and I don't know how to not destroy what we have. I've already asked him to risk everything for me." The therapist was quiet for a moment. She was the kind of therapist who didn't rush to give advice or fix things, the kind who understood that sometimes the work was just in the saying. "Did he ask you to save yourself?" the therapist asked finally. "Or did he just create the space where you could?" Victoria thought about that, about Marcus in the diner, not asking her to explain, about Marcus in the apartment, listening to her confession without judgment, about Marcus in the boardroom, standing in the truth of what he'd said while the world watched. He had never asked her for anything except honesty. He had never demanded that she be anyone other than who she was. He had just created the space, and she had chosen to step into it. That was different. That was something she could build on. On a Saturday in May, Victoria bought cookies from a bakery on Millbrook, the place Marcus had mentioned once, in passing, like it was nothing. The place that made chocolate chip cookies with sea salt that were worth the drive. She'd never bought cookies for anyone before. It seemed like something normal people did. Something people did when they didn't know how to say, "I'm terrified and I'm choosing you anyway." She parked her own car at the curb. No security waiting. No arrangement, just proximity and choice. She stood at Marcus's door holding a white bakery box. And she was more terrified than she'd ever been in a boardroom. More uncertain than she'd ever been as a CEO. Amara answered the door because she always answered the door before her father could get there. "Dad, someone's here," Marcus heard her call. "Do you know her?" He came out of the kitchen drying his hands. Victoria was standing in his doorway. No business attire. No security detail. No armor. Just a woman in a jacket holding a white bakery box, looking uncertain. Genuinely, unguardedly uncertain. He had never seen that before. Amara was looking up at her with the direct, unfiltered appraisal that 7-year-olds apply to unfamiliar adults, the kind of assessment that cut through everything false and got straight to what mattered. "Hi," Victoria said to Amara. "Hi," Amara said. "What's in the box?" "Cookies from the place on Millbrook," Victoria said. Amara turned to Marcus with an expression that had already reached a verdict. He looked at Victoria over his daughter's head, at the bakery box, at the sedan parked at the curb, at the particular way she was standing, which was different from any way he'd seen her stand. In a hotel diner, in a borrowed apartment, in a conference room full of people waiting for her to fail. "I'm not here to ask you for anything," Victoria said. "I want to be clear about that first. I just wanted to ask whether this time you'd consider staying because of me. Not because of what I needed. Just because of me." Marcus looked at her for a long moment, understood what this had cost her, understood what this choice meant. He pulled the door open wider. "Come in," he said. "Amara's been trying to teach me chess all morning and I'm losing badly. Third opinion would help." Amara immediately grabbed Victoria's free hand and began explaining the rules of chess with significant inaccuracies before they even reached the kitchen table. Victoria, to her credit, listened to all of it like it was the most important thing anyone had ever said. Marcus put the kettle on. Over his shoulder, he watched his daughter and this powerful woman having a conversation about chess and family and strategy. He watched his daughter immediately accept Victoria in a way she hadn't accepted anyone since her mother left. He watched something settle in his chest. This was it. This was the real moment, not the board meeting, not the business triumph. This, tea and cookies, a child explaining chess rules with significant inaccuracies, a powerful woman who'd chosen to be present instead of powerful. After Amara was asleep, Victoria sat on his kitchen counter while he cleaned up the dishes. She mentioned her ex-husband, mentioned that he wouldn't accept she was serious, mentioned that he would try to use Marcus as leverage against her. Marcus didn't flinch. He'd expected this. He'd known there would be complications. "He'll make things difficult," Victoria said. "For you, for us." "I know," Marcus said, "and I can promise you truth every day, even when it's uncomfortable. I can promise you that Amara comes first. That my job takes time, that I don't have the money you have or the sophistication you have, but I can promise you truth, and I can promise you presence. That's all I want," Victoria said. "The truth, and you." He kissed her then. Not because it was a moment for kissing, just because she was here, just because she was real. 1 month later, Jefferson Elementary held its spring art display, in the same multi-purpose room where Family Day had gone so wrong months earlier. The room had been transformed with student paintings, paper lanterns swaying gently overhead. Parents wandered through with punch cups and paper plates of cookies, chatting in clusters beneath the fluorescent lights. Marcus walked in with Amara on one side and Victoria on the other. He felt eyes on them, the same kind of eyes as before. Let them look. He was done arranging his life according to what strangers thought a family should resemble. Amara led them to her display board. There were watercolor trees, crayon self-portraits, a clay bird with one wing slightly larger than the other, and in the center, a new drawing. A house under a deep blue sky. 3 figures standing in front of it holding hands. One of Amara's classmates stopped beside them. "Who's that?" she asked, pointing to the woman in the drawing. Amara looked up at Marcus. then at Victoria. Neither of them answered for her. Amara lifted her chin. "That's my family," she said. The girl accepted that with the simple ease children were capable of, when adults didn't teach them otherwise. "Cool," she said, and wandered off toward the cookie table. Marcus felt something settle inside him at last. Victoria looked at the drawing. "I like the shoes again," she said, referring to the exaggerated footwear Amara always drew. Amara grinned. "They are still dramatic." "They should be," Victoria said. Amara reached for Victoria's hand. Victoria took it. A second later, Marcus took Victoria's other hand without having to think himself into courage. They stood there together in the bright school lights while laughter drifted around them. And spring pressed gently at the windows. No one had to rescue anyone. No one had to prove anything. They just stood there because they had chosen to. Marcus had spent years believing love was measured mostly by what pain he could prevent. Standing there, he understood something better. Love was also measured by who returned, who told the truth, who did the hard work to become safe, who chose over and over not to let fear make every decision. Summer arrived with intensity. Marcus completed his first session of the advanced engineering program at the city. Tom Barnes's recommendation had proven instrumental. The professors recognized something in him. Intelligence, maturity, the kind of clarity of purpose that came from someone who knew exactly why they were fighting. He'd had to restructure his life. Amara spent more time with Ms. Jackson after school. Victoria had helped him set up a tutoring arrangement to keep her sharp. But the program was exactly what he needed. It was the future he'd sacrificed 3 years ago. Now available again because he'd been willing to risk everything for what was right. Amara won the school chess tournament in June. Victoria had taught her strategy. Real strategy, not the simplified children's version. Marcus watched his daughter accept a medal from the principal. And he understood how Victoria had woven herself into their lives, not by trying to replace what came before, but by adding something that had been missing. Victoria's company continued under new board direction. The projects that came forward focused on properties that served communities instead of displaced them. She'd learned finally what her father had been trying to teach her for 30 years. That wealth wasn't the point. That legacy wasn't power. That building something meaningful required sacrifice. David Ashford resurfaced at a different company in a different city. He carried a reputation now. The reputation of the man who had underestimated integrity. He would never hold power in the same way again. One evening, while Amara was asleep, Victoria found Marcus in the kitchen with legal paperwork spread across the counter. Custody documents, insurance updates, beneficiary forms, all the small ways he'd been including her in his life permanently. "Marry me," he said, not a question, a statement. "So I can keep doing this forever." She said yes. Because it wasn't romantic, it was real. The shock at the end of this story isn't that she was a CEO. Everyone assumes powerful people are interesting. The real shock is what you find when they stop performing power and start being present. It's the woman beneath the armor, terrified that she'd destroyed everything, carrying the weight of her father's legacy and her own fear. It's the man willing to walk into a room full of people who'd spent their entire lives winning and tell them something they didn't want to hear. Not because he was angry, but because integrity meant something to him that wealth and power never could. What matters is this. Real connection doesn't happen in boardrooms or perfect moments. It happens when someone chooses to be vulnerable and someone else chooses to open the door. Not to save them, not to fix them, just to witness them. That's when everything changes. Marcus understood that standing up wasn't about stopping a business deal. It was about proving to his daughter what integrity looked like lived out. Victoria understood that all the wealth and power and title in the world meant nothing, compared to one man's willingness to risk everything because it was right. They won, but not because they won the fight. They won because they chose each other. Because they understood, finally, that extraordinary change doesn't happen from one grand gesture. It happens through 10,000 small choices to tell the truth, to stay when leaving is easier, to be present when absence is more comfortable, to love someone not because they're convenient, but because they're real. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to our channel. There are more stories like this one waiting. Stories about grace, second chances, and the quiet courage it takes to build something worth keeping.